you got to get up. Come on. I heard guns popping off.
On a quiet night in Houston, Texas, an all-American family is ripped apart when a former NFL player and his beautiful wife are brutally murdered inside their own home. As more and more details of this grisly murder came to light, this facade of the picture-perfect family starts to come apart, and the family starts to point fingers at each other. It was a complicated case. A number of prosecutors get involved, including two that I helped train, one now a defense lawyer, who battle it out against each other.
Test firing a weapon? You know what his intent is.
Whatever the story is, figure it out.
Neither of these lawyers is going to back down as they fight each other and they fight for justice and truth in the courtroom.
Houston 911, do you need medical, police, or fire?
I just heard 2 gunshots downstairs in my parents' room.
And your name?
AJ?
Any medical attention needed?
Yes. I heard gunshots, so I don't really know.
Did it sound like a handgun, rifle, or shotgun?
I mean, I did gunshot. I know my dad has 3. You're destroyed right next to bed.
And where are you at in the house? Okay. Okay. They're asking you to step out of the house.
As HPD arrives, AJ turns off the alarm system as he meets them at the front door with his little sister, Kara. At that point, the number one priority is to get AJ and his little sister outside of the house and to safety.
The initial patrol officers swept the house and discovered there was no sign of forced entry. As they were searching, officers did not find anyone else in the home. And then they enter the bedroom of A.J. Armstrong and Kara's parents. And they see Dawn and Antonio Sr., who had been shot.
As soon as I pull up, an officer proceeds to tell me we have 2 victims upstairs in bed with GSW to the head, which is a gunshot wound to the head. We enter the room. Closest to the door is Mrs. Armstrong. And I immediately go to her first. I just go to checking pulses and looking for a chest rise and fall. And then once I didn't feel anything for about 15-20 seconds, I realized that she's no longer with us. Immediately after that, I'm walking around the bed to Mr. Armstrong's side, and he had a pillow over his head. I take the pillow off, and he's still alive. He's still breathing. He's still trying to live. So we go into rescue mode. He has blood everywhere, and you can see the entry wound from his gunshot wound to the head. Once we get Antonio onto the stretcher, I have a young gentleman come up to me. He looks me in my eyes, and he says, "Is he going to be okay?" And you could tell that he was worried. He didn't say who he was at the time. He looked like a family member, and I just told him, I was like, we're doing the best we can for him.
While the police are searching the house, A.J. Armstrong calls his brother Josh, who lives right down the street, to tell him about what had just happened.
I had gotten woken up by Josh coming in, yelling. I was half asleep still, like, what is going on? He said that his younger brother, A.J., had called him and told him that someone was in his parents' house a couple streets away. Josh told me to stay at the apartment, and then he ran over there.
The homicide detectives secure the scene, and they look around. And they see shell casings in the bedroom. They also noticed that there was a bullet hole in the ceiling right outside the parents' bedroom, which was under A.J. Armstrong's bedroom. They notice as they sweep the kitchen that there is a gun on the countertop that could be the murder weapon.
When HPD examined the gun they believed to be the murder weapon, they didn't find any fingerprints, but they were able to determine that that's the same gun that belonged to Antonio Armstrong Sr., and he normally kept it in a bedside table.
Also on the counter, there is a scratched out note that says, "We've been watching you for a long time." It's like something out of a movie.
That only adds to the mystery, because who would want Don and Antonio Sr. dead?
It was hard to live in Houston, Texas, and not know about the Armstrongs. Antonio Sr., who is an All-American college football player who gets drafted in the NFL, he parlays that into owning gyms in Houston. His wife is beloved in the community, and they send their kids to the most prestigious school in Houston, the Kincaid School. They're the kind of folks you would want to be jealous of, but nobody could be because they were so darn charismatic.
Antonio and Don were the greatest people, really caring. Josh and his mother had a great bond. The family just seemed so happy, so close together.
After the attack, Antonio Sr. was on life support for several hours, and sadly, he passed that evening, but he had never woken up. He was never able to say what happened.
Josh was so confused. People were very sad. Antonio and Don were just all around great people.
The police interview AJ, his little sister Kara, and the older brother Josh, who arrives at the scene a little later. Based on that interview and the evidence they retrieved from the crime scene, the investigators are suspicious about what happened that night. So AJ Armstrong is taken down to HPD and questioned into the early hours of the morning.
What's your first name?
Antonio.
So you're 16?
Yes, sir.
You know, we need to sit down and talk to you, figure what happened today, what's been going on.
It was like probably 1 or 2, and I went to the restroom, and when I came out, I heard the door open, and I thought it was my parents, so I walked downstairs when I heard the 2 gunshots go off, and I ran back upstairs. And when I ran back upstairs, I heard somebody run out of my parents' room and hit the door. And then I don't know how they got out.
Well, did you physically see somebody? Or?
No, I saw him running. So I just took off back upstairs and went straight to my closet. And that's when I called 911. I just personally felt bad because I saw the guy. I feel like I should have done something.
Okay, when you called 911, there's just so much that doesn't match.
In a 16-minute 911 tape, he never mentions that there is a masked man in the house. Then hours later, in his statement says, "Oh, there was a masked man in the house and I saw him running."
You know, ultimately, we need to figure out what happened today. When you start having inconsistencies,
Exactly.
It starts making it tough. Because now we're at a loss of trust.
Josh recently had found out that he was not biological to Antonio Sr. Antonio was a stepdad. He felt like he was kind of the black sheep of the family.
Investigators noticed a burn mark at the top of the stairs.
That was his first attempt to kill his parents.
While AJ Armstrong Jr. is at HPD being questioned about the murder of his parents, AJ makes the surprising admission that he saw the suspect leaving his parents' bedroom.
What did he look like?
I mean, they had it was like a mask. You could only see the eyes and the mouth, but he looked like a black guy, but I'm not 100% positive, but I'm pretty sure it was an African American.
In a 16-minute 911 tape, he never mentions that there is a masked man in the house. Then hours later, in his statement says, "Oh, there was a masked man in the house and I saw him running." That just doesn't add up.
Does your dad own a gun?
Yes, he does. He has his case in one of his drawers, and my dad, his drawers, the closet, and under the bed is off limits, so I've never gone in there or seen it or anything like that.
You know, when we're in the study that leads to your dad's room.
Right.
In there, when you look up, there's a bullet hole in the ceiling that comes from your bedroom.
Bullet hole in the ceiling.
Yeah, that comes through the floor. And then on the floor, there's an actual bullet that was actually fired.
I can explain the gun from the room upstairs. It was 2, maybe 3 weeks ago. Me and one of my friends was just playing around. Hey, have you ever shot a gun before? And I went and checked the 3 places, and the gun was under my dad's bed. I laid my pillow thinking like that would stop it, but I guess it did not stop it.
Yeah. Now, see, and that kind of goes back to what we were saying just a minute ago. You said that you haven't seen it, and then now we kind of give you a little more, and then it's like, oh, wait a minute, this is kind of the time to clear it up.
Deactivate the alarm before you unlock the door for the officers?
Yes.
Man. And you see, and that's kind of where we're at, that dilemma where, it's just several things that aren't lining up.
Right.
You had to unlock the door to get out. The back door's locked. Everything's locked.
Right.
The house is completely secured with locks and with an alarm system. Your brother Josh isn't even there. He's down the street at his place.
Your sister's asleep.
So that only leaves
you.
I had nothing to do with this.
HPD pays very close attention to the statement and the details of what A.J. Armstrong tells him that night. That, along with the 911 call that A.J. made that night, and all of the other things that HPD saw with their own eyes at the scene, A.J.'s story didn't add up. On top of that, the gun that was recovered at the crime scene that belonged to Antonio Sr. was tested, and they were able to identify that as being the gun that fired the bullets into Antonio and Dawn's bodies. Based on all that they learned, they arrested A.J. Armstrong, and he was subsequently indicted for capital murder.
The family was completely behind A.J. since day one. And Josh was very angry. He said they have the wrong person. He didn't do this.
I remember when this case happened because the school where AJ went is where my daughter Samantha went to school, and my daughter Kelsey went to school with Josh at St. Francis. So we all knew the kids, the boys, we all knew of the parents. Everybody knew somebody involved in this case, whether it was the defendant or one of the victims.
At Antonio and Dawn's funeral, I could really see how much so many people cared about them. People were very sad. It was really hard to see Josh like that. I've never seen anybody that sad and that hurt. I just remember he was crying for a long time, and I didn't really know what to do other than just be there for him.
I was brought in to represent AJ when Chris Collins, my co-counsel in this case, called me. Chris Collins was Antonio Sr.'s personal lawyer. When I spoke with AJ's family members about AJ and I learned about AJ, I was like, there's no way this kid could have committed this crime. It just doesn't make any sense.
Rick DeToto is now a very well-known defense attorney, but before that, he worked at the DA's office, and that's where I first met him. He was like this stud guy walking around real cocky, not intimidated by anyone. When I heard that A.J. Armstrong hired Rick DeToto as his lawyer, I thought, ooh, good move.
AJ's initially charged in juvenile court, and one of the things the prosecutors in juvenile court can do in Texas is determine if they want to certify someone as an adult. Prosecutor filed a petition to certify him. We had a hearing. The judge in the juvenile court certified him as an adult.
Because A.J. Armstrong was only 16 years old, he is able to be released on bond, and he's placed in the custody of his grandmother, Kay Winston. Before the trial, there's still evidence that can be gathered and collected to get the case even tighter and cleaner and stronger. In the weeks following the murder, HPD begins putting together its case, along with the prosecutors, which includes the evidence they retrieved from the crime scene, as well as the alarm records and cell phone data.
Text messages showed that the family relationship from the outside it's perceived as good, but it was volatile from within. Through the text messages, we learned that there were issues between AJ and his parents. There were events leading up to the night of the murders. He was using money on drugs. And more than anything, I think his mother was upset by the constant lying. It was a boiling pot from within inside the four walls of that house.
But it's actually A.J. Armstrong's actions the days before this murder that was one big piece of our puzzle to point to one direction of who killed the Armstrongs.
He fired a gun in his room through 2 pillows down to the 2nd floor. Also, investigators notice a burn mark at the top of the stairs. Now, it smells like gasoline on the carpet. AJ said he had just dropped a match. Well, when you look at it, clearly that is not what would happen if somebody just dropped a match. They found a bottle in his room. They tested it, and it came back to having gasoline inside the bottle.
If you look at where that burn mark is, it's at the top of the staircase, right outside his parents' bedroom. And so if that lights up the house, the parents can't get out. And in fact, Dawn sends a text message to her other son, Josh, who lives down the street, saying, AJ tried to burn the house down. It's no surprise when you put it all together that he ended up in that bedroom shooting both his parents.
Defense attorney Rick DeToto says the 16-year-old is a victim in this case, not the perpetrator.
He's a great kid from a good family, and there's absolutely no motive why this happened. It doesn't make sense.
It was really a brilliant, I believe, move on the part of the defense attorney is to try this case out into the public before it ever hit the courtroom.
That created a feeling in the community of, is this kid being railroaded?
While A.J. Armstrong has the support of most everyone in his family, especially his grandparents, that same family turns on, surprisingly, another member of their very own family.
Josh recently had found out that Antonio was his stepdad. And when Josh found out that he was not biological to Antonio Sr., it affected him. According to the family, there was some jealousy with Josh, the way they were treating AJ and the way they were treating Kayra, and how he felt like he was kind of the black sheep of the family. So we presented Josh Armstrong as an alternative suspect in this case.
In the months leading up to the trial, A.J. Armstrong's defense lawyer, Rick DeToto, made all kinds of statements in the news that A.J.'s half-brother, Josh Armstrong, could be the true killer.
The defense's strategy was to present Josh as the black sheep of the family, the half-brother, not even fully related to Antonio Armstrong Sr., not blood.
Before the murders, they spoke every single day. They loved Josh, and Josh loved them. That was his real dad to him. Josh and I had been together for a little bit over a year before the murders. We met in college. We just connected so well. And probably within that month, we started dating. But Josh's behavior after the murders completely changed. At first, it was just depression, but then a week or two later is when I started seeing the paranoia come out. He felt that if somebody went after the parents, what's to stop them from going after him and I? I don't think that Josh knew his family was saying that he's the one who did it.
Despite all of the defense's theories that Josh Armstrong was the true killer, he was never truly considered a suspect by HPD because at the time of the murder, Josh always had a hard, firm alibi that he was with his girlfriend, Hannah.
Lead prosecutor was John Brewer. He was assisted by Fareen Ansari and also Lester Blizzard. The prosecution leaned a lot into motive. They were trying to get into the mind of A.J. Armstrong. They are presenting a lot of evidence regarding grades and drug use and the taking away of vehicles, trying to pin basically the motive in front of the jury as to why A.J. Armstrong killed both of his parents.
He had failed out of the prestigious Kincaid School. His car was taken away from him and he couldn't see his girlfriend. To a teenager, that's their entire world.
The people who took all these things away from him, they ended up dead. Other than motive, the strongest evidence the prosecution has are his actions leading up to the murder. The prosecution is also presenting a lot of evidence regarding the alarm records.
The records said that the night of the murders, the alarm was set, the door was locked, there was no sign of forced entry.
So the prosecution was arguing because the alarm system was on and the records showed that no one came in or came out, that there was no way anyone else could have done it except for AJ. What they didn't know was that Josh had access to the house, and we had an alarm expert that could show that the way the zones were set up in that house, the door coming into the garage, if it was cracked, and we had testimony from the witnesses that that door frequently wouldn't close all the way, it would leave the front door open, meaning that you could open and close the door without the alarm going off. And we were able to call that expert during the trial to show that that's a problem with the alarm system in a way someone could get in and out and not trigger the alarm.
Even though it's unlikely that two doors would have been open at the same time so that the alarm wouldn't go off, the defense was able to point out that nobody had actually looked into that possibility, because they said from the beginning HPD zeroed in on AJ as their only suspect.
In 11 minutes of going into that house, before anything, they made up their mind. He did it. There's no physical evidence that ties AJ to the homicide. There's no DNA, there's no blood, there's no hair fibers, there's nothing. There's no blood on the gun, there's no blood in his room, there's no blood on his clothes. There was no physical evidence in a very bloody scene in the bedroom that linked AJ to the crime except his presence in the house.
The jury deliberates for several days, and they're unable to reach a verdict. Trial comes back as a mistrial. There were 8 jurors who believed he was guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, and there were 4 who didn't believe the state proved it beyond a reasonable doubt.
It was that trial team's belief that the jurors were saying, it's not like we don't think he did it, but there were people in the room that knew the consequences, that they were going to send someone to prison for the rest of their life on a crime they did at 16. And with the family supporting him and people believing in him, they just emotionally couldn't do it.
I was very relieved. Anytime our clients get to go home is a good day, but I also knew it was going to come back.
When a jury is hung and a mistrial is declared, the usual answer is, we're going to try it again. The difference in this case is that you have the family of the victims, who also happen to be the family of the defendant. They do not believe the case should be tried again.
We can't move on with our lives, and we can't forget what we've been through.
With all that pressure coming to bear on the DA's office, what's going to happen next? When the trial against A.J. Armstrong for the murder of his parents was hung and a mistrial was declared, the DA's office makes the decision to try the case for a second time, because when you have 2 people who are murdered and the state of the evidence points to one suspect, you're going to try that case again.
After that first trial, some of the trial team had gone to other DA's office, and so they were looking for a new team to try the case. I had picked up the case in between trial 1 and trial 2. I knew that it was a very contested case, and so I knew it was going to be an uphill battle when I took over the case.
And Ryan asked me to join him to try the case for the second trial.
This is already a very compelling case, and it's captured all of our attention. I'm especially paying attention to it because I know the lawyers so well. Both John Jordan and Rick DeToto worked at the DA's office, and I helped train them. John Jordan's style is a little more dramatic. He very much likes the whole theater courtroom part of a trial. And knowing those guys, they are both very ready to duke it out against each other in the courtroom.
I have a great deal of respect for Rick DeToto. He is a tremendous advocate. Juries love him. The problem is, we had the truth on our side. We kind of went into the second trial, even though we were kind of new. We didn't know the case like the defense team who had had it since day one. We're like, okay, well, we just have to get a better jury, and the evidence is great, and so we're going to try the case somewhat similarly, and we trust the evidence enough that we are confident that we're going to get a guilty verdict.
It's now 3 years later since the first trial, and in that time, A.J. Armstrong has grown up. He is now married to his longtime girlfriend, Kate. He has a son of his own. He looks a lot older. This is going to be a whole different kind of appearance that he portrays in front of a jury this time compared to last time.
In the opening statement, we recognize it's hard for rational, non-sociopathic people to get their head around the idea of what seems like normal teenage problems can lead to homicide. So what we did is we told the jury is you may never know why he did it, but you're going to be very confident and know he did it based on the evidence.
So we stuck to his actions, his words, and the alarm records.
In the first trial, the defense claimed that doors could be open and the alarm not go off. And it is the state's burden to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the night of the murders, that house was secure.
The alarm system is complex. And what we learned is in the first trial, neither the state nor the defense had the complete records. They had records from ADT alarm system. ADT is the hardware side of this case, but they contract with a software company who monitors those records, and that company is Alarm.com. And so when we got Alarm.com's records prior to trial 2, we see now that there is way more activity that can be determined within the records, showing that nobody went in and out of the house and that the alarm system did not trigger, it did not go off the night of the murders.
So we had an expert from ADT to explain the alarm.
My co-counsel, Chris Collins, was able to determine on cross-examination that there was a minimum of like 77 errors in the records of the alarm system. Chris was able to go step by step with that alarm expert and show to the jury that the records weren't accurate. And it was difficult to argue that no one could have gotten in and no one could have gotten out.
The defense really leaned into Josh in the second trial. In the first trial, they throw him out as a possible suspect. By the time trial 2 comes around, they have put all their cards in the Josh Armstrong basket as an alternate suspect.
What we brought to the second trial that we didn't bring in the first trial was we got additional records regarding the alternative suspect's mental health history, and these records were extremely detailed. We needed to present them to show the jury that the mental health issues occurred before the murders, not just after.
This is the only case I've ever tried in my career where we had to essentially be a prosecutor and a defense attorney in the same trial. We are fighting to convict somebody we know is guilty and at the same time fighting to exonerate somebody we know is innocent.
What we had to deal with in the second trial that the first team didn't is the court had ruled that they could put forward Josh Armstrong's mental illness as an alternative suspect theory. Not only did we have a very good expert witness to rebut that in a psychiatrist, but we had the person who knew Josh the best, his living girlfriend, Hannah Pallon.
Hannah Pallon testifies as to where Josh was the night of the murders, and she also provided a lot of correcting the things that the family was trying to portray about Josh.
I testified at the trial because I felt like I needed to be the one to say, this is all not right. Josh was never like this before this happened, before his parents were killed. There was never any sign of mental illness. There was no sign of depression. He had a bright future. He loved his family. And what AJ's lawyers did up there was disgusting.
Watching how all this played out, the way she brought it to life for the jury, the way she defended the honor of Josh, good for her. Good for her. I hope she's proud of herself because we all are.
When the jury went out for deliberations in the second trial, I was as confident as I always am. And as the deliberations lingered and as it went on and on, started getting worried. They came back. They, too, could not reach a verdict. And I felt like I had been punched in the gut.
But this time it flipped. It went from 8 not guilty to 4 guilty.
So when they came back and there were more jurors for not guilty than guilty, it was tough to recover from that.
It is. It's somewhat humiliating. We're going the wrong direction. I mean, what are we doing here? It was devastating.
After that second trial ended in a hung jury, you have 2 prosecutors who've just lost trial number 2, and a decision has to be made. Do we try this case for a third time? The elected DA is the person who makes that decision. So when John Jordan and Ryan Trask made the commitment that they wanted to try this case a third time and do it again because they knew what the evidence was, that's the representation they made to their boss, and that's the decision that was made because they believed in this case.
But then there was a groundswell of supporters for AJ. Things started gaining momentum where people were like, enough is enough. Leave this kid alone. You sent your best prosecutors, you sent all your evidence, you sent hundreds of witnesses, you spent millions of dollars to go after this young man, and you can't get him. Let him go.
After that second trial ended in a hung jury, John Jordan and Ryan Trask made the commitment that they wanted to try this case a third time and do it again because they knew what the evidence was. But in the first trial, the split was 8-4 for guilty, and in the second trial, the split was 8-4 for not guilty. So the prosecutors knew they were facing even more pressure from the court of public opinion to try and make sure they got a verdict in the third trial.
We talked to some of the jurors, and sure enough, they told us the same thing that first jury said. That it's not that we don't believe in the evidence. It's that they didn't want to convict him, knowing the consequences of life imprisonment. That started our strategy for that third trial. We were going to do everything different because a fool does the same thing over and over again. So we were ready for the third trial and presenting our case in a very different way.
We had been to the Armstrong house several times, and one thing that John said to me the last time we went, he said, do you ever notice how narrow walking through this hall would be and how close the staircase is to the doors to the Armstrong's room? And John had a brilliant idea.
When I was a young prosecutor, I happened to actually be in the courtroom watching the Susan Wright trial, where Kelly Siegler brought the bed into the courtroom and demonstrated the crime.
And I attack at the head area first.
When A.J. Armstrong, in his statement to law enforcement that night, says he saw a masked man coming from his parents' bedroom as he was on the stairs, you can see how close in proximity he would have been to this alleged masked man is very important. So how do you do that? Well, you build a staircase.
We are taught at the DA's office to make the crime come alive in front of the jury. We all learn that. When you do that, you put the jury there where they can't avoid seeing what happened.
When we were preparing for trial 3, we had solicited as one of the foremost experts in blood spatter as well as scene reconstruction, Shelley Rossi from the Montgomery County DA's office, who's helped me on cases before. She spent hours to take measurements and pictures. And she came in and she did all the measurements. So that staircase is the exact same dimensions. We placed the staircase away from the end of the jury box so they would see how close in proximity A.J. Armstrong would have been, if you believe his statement, on the staircase to this alleged made-up assailant who had a mask on. And so 2 things would have happened since it's so close, literally 3 feet and 3 inches, is 1, being that close, the assailant would have killed A.J. Armstrong and not allowed a survivor in the home. Or 2,
911, do you need medical, police, or fire?
I heard 2 gunshots downstairs in my parents' room.
The very first words out of your mouth when you call 911 immediately afterwards was, "There's a masked man in my house."
Can't run from it was an excellent point by them.
In the very way that the first 2 juries tried to avoid that cold reality of how horrible this crime was, we were not going to let them do it. They were going to have to see it. They were going to have to confront it. Well, now we're going to bring the bedroom into the courtroom. So we set up a mock bedroom.
I thought it was important for the jury to see if there was an unknown intruder that came into the home in the middle of the night to retrieve Antonio Armstrong's firearm, that they would have to come into the bedroom, walk around the king-size bed over to the nightstand, go into the bottom drawer, remove the firearm, assume that it's loaded, come back around to Dawn's side of the bed, and fire 4 shots in the middle of the night. I think that out of all of the assumptions that it was an unknown masked intruder, to do that was just ludicrous.
Reconstructing the bedroom was straight out of the Kelly Siegler playbook. It's effective, but it's like show and lights and smoke and fog and mirrors. I think it was just over dramatic.
When John Jordan started to build out the stairwell and the bedroom, I heard all about it. I got a lot of text messages and phone calls. Guess what Jordan's doing? You know where he's getting it from. So, it makes me proud that he thought to do that.
6 inches in his family.
I've been called dramatic and theatrical a few times in my life. But if it works and a jury understands what we're trying to say, then that's what matters.
After we presented the reconstruction of the crime scene, one of the things we decided to do differently was how we presented the alarm records. In the second trial, we had one representative, an expert from ADT, to explain the alarm.
What we learned in trial 2 is that because the expert from ADT did not understand the software from alarm.com, he did not have answers for some of the things that were being asked of him by the defense attorney on cross-examination. So in trial 3, we now bring the expert that understands all of the alarm records, Jason DeCosta, who was the VP for alarm.com. And we went through for hours, and we went through everything. And he testified to a lot of the things that the defense was trying to say to were errors in the alarm records. He could turn around and say, that's not an error. That's how the alarm records should be reporting. And so he was a great help to us in trial 3, bring the truth to the jury about what the alarm records really meant.
In closing, what I wanted the jury to feel was everything that I've tried to get them to feel in the first 2 trials. Police did a horrible job. They narrowed in on AJ, but I got really aggressive.
This is a reckless prosecution. Only you can stop it. Only you can tell them enough is enough.
In closing argument, I used the alarm records. I tied in how voluminous those records were. And then I showed a text to the jury. It was something that Dawn had sent to her son, AJ, months before her murder. And it said, the alarm doesn't lie, you lie.
After 2 hung juries and an exhausting 3rd trial, the prosecutors are making their final argument to the jury in closing statements.
Because this defendant has the ability to fool everybody, but he couldn't fool Mama. Towards the end of my closing, since it became a decision for the jury, was it Josh or was it AJ? We ended it with what we truly believed. I want to end this trial attempting to give a voice to Dawn. You are the only people in our community who, with your verdict, can exonerate my innocent son by holding my guilty one accountable. You could see her saying that.
It has been an emotional 1.5 years. And I told John, if he's not convicted on the evidence we just presented, it will never be good enough.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Antonio Armstrong Jr., guilty.
Our heart goes out to the family. We understand they're going through a lot. It's just their truth is not the truth, but our heart goes out to them because they are victims. Because he was found guilty of capital murder is an automatic life sentence, and because he was 16 at the time of the crime, he'll be eligible for parole in 40 calendar years.
It's the worst moment of my career. It's a complicated emotion in that I know I fought my ass off for him. I gave a lot for that young man, but I still feel like I let him down.
Obviously, the work that all these lawyers did is pretty impressive. To be able to change their strategy based on how it played out in the last trial and move forward and stay so invested in this case speaks a lot to what good lawyers they are.
I think Antonio and Dawn would be proud of their son Josh. I even think they would forgive AJ for what he did because that's the kind of people Antonio and Dawn were. But I know Antonio and Dawn have to be proud of the fact that we're getting the truth.
I think Josh is the ultimate victim of these murders, and to be so compassionate for your family and believe that you are one of them only to see what played out in those trials. I don't know how somebody recovers from something like that.
I'm sure he's seeing the news and seeing how he's being portrayed. Frankly, we think Dawn would have been appalled. And yes, it's two people who never met her, who's going into that courtroom, giving her a voice and holding the truth accountable and exonerating one son by convicting the other. Until the end of my career, I will be very proud of what we did to do that.
With A.J. Armstrong finally being found guilty in the courtroom, I think the hope for all of us is that Josh can walk away knowing in his heart he didn't do anything wrong, and he can go try and live his best life without anybody in his family on his side. And that's going to be really hard for him to do, but I think that all of us really hope that he's able to do that.